Misty Valley Cooperative presents Dim and Flaring Lamps. The paths of the world twist and turn. They divide and converge, taking you to unexpected places. What is a ghost but something dead that lingers? The vestige of a dark thought, out for a walk on a bitter day. Can human voices reach them? Can human warmth attract them? Do living souls shine out like lamps to guide the dead along their way? Look, the flame is lit. Do you see how the shapes are formed? The Forked Ways, Part 3, Dim and Flaring Lamps, by Beaufort. 4. The Ghost of Quarry Ridge. You have to anticipate the turn, said Silver. You slow down before you get to the curve. Then you can speed back up as you drive through and start to straighten the wheel. This is too complicated, Fletch protested, straightening his arms and pushing himself back against the seat. And I can't see the edges of the road. You don't have to. Just aim for the middle of the lane. Silver placed a hand on the dashboard. Yikes! The old gray Ford took the curve fast, crossed the center line, then overcorrected and grazed the edge of the highway. Yee-haw, said Fletch. I'm driving. I still want to live, Silver reminded him. Why does your truck rattle like that? Fletch asked. It's shaking with fear. Fletch eased off the accelerator and glanced in Silver's direction. Do you want to go someplace or just drive around? Long as we keep to the country, I don't care. Just don't head for any towns. Does Pendergrass count? Fletch asked him. Only to the people who live there. The truck felt big and ungainly to Fletch. The play in the steering wheel made it difficult for him to keep to the center of the lane. And even worse, the accelerator tended to stick. The heat worked, at least. Though Silver's face remained neutral, Fletch could sense the merriment in him. He was enjoying the struggle entirely too much. How old were you when you first learned to drive? He asked. 13, said Silver. I had to sit on a pillow. I need one now. The dashboard blocks my vision. You could sit on my lap. Not a good idea, Fletch said. We'd wreck for sure. Silver shrugged. At least we'd go out in a blaze of glory. Though the air of the December afternoon hung gray and cold about them, Fletch's heart felt light. Christmas was less than 3 weeks away, and today the boy he loved was teaching him how to drive. He found it hard to imagine how life could get any better. He took the next curve carefully, anxious for Silver's approval. After they crossed the interstate, the road straightened, passing through early winter woods and bare slopes of farmland. Fletch turned off the highway to avoid the next town, but soon found himself lost in the maze of twisting dirt roads south of Tadmor. They passed a little church at a crossroads and slowed down to look at it. The building resembled their own church at Assembly, simple in style, painted white with a small steeple. A wreath with a red bow graced the door, and more wreaths hung on the doors of the modular annex, the sort of building which might contain classrooms or a fellowship hall. "I've never visited this church," Silver said. "We ought to drop in some Sunday." "You're kidding me," said Fletch, casting a suspicious glance toward the front of the building. "They'd fire up the furnace just for us. Places like that terrify me." "Good country people," Silver said with a smile. "Yeah, right, and they've got God on their side." He flipped on the signal and turned into the empty parking lot. "Are you going to stop?" Silver asked. "No, just turning around. I'm lost." Silver pointed beyond the cemetery. "If it helps, I think Gainesville's about 15 miles over yonder." Fletch looked, and that was when he saw the dead girl. He hit the brakes, and the truck jerked to a stop. "Silver," he whispered. Then he flung open the door of the truck and ran across the gravel parking lot. Silver followed, reaching him just as he reached the girl. She lay across a rough stone slab at the edge of the cemetery. A pool of dark blood had congealed around her. Her overcoat lay among the fallen leaves, and the sleeves of her thick wool sweater were pushed up, revealing the inner side of her forearms, slashed from elbow to wrist. A small knife, some kind of artisan's tool, lay on the stone. Fletch groaned, sinking down beside her. Ragged blonde hair fanned across her thin, almost elfin face, framing vacant eyes as dry as pebbles. She looked about 13. "Fletch?" He turned. Silver looked at him intently. "Stay here with her. I'm going down the road to find a telephone. I saw a house about half a mile back. I should be only a few minutes." He looked around. "What is this place? What church?" Fletch swallowed. "Quarry Ridge. It's on the sign." Silver nodded. "I'll be back as quick as I can." Fletch looked at the girl. "How long do you think she's been here?" "Not long. It's Monday. People would have been at church last night." "Go on." Fletch gave him a push. "I'll be okay. But hurry." As Silver left, Fletch turned again, unwillingly, to look at the girl's arms. Both arms. What could have brought her to this? How had she even managed to do it? Fletcher's ears began to ring, and his vision blurred. He looked away, taking in breaths of cold, clean air. The girl looked familiar, but he couldn't place her. Was she someone from school? He stood up, walked around the grave, wondering if she had left a note, but there was nothing. He shivered in his coat and drew his collar up against the wind. Finally he looked at the girl again, noting her soft turtleneck sweater and embroidered jeans, her silver necklace with a small cross. Fletch moved to a gravestone a short distance away and sat beside it. He bit his lip, trying not to cry, then buried his face in his hands. He smelled coal smoke, tasted metal at the back of his throat. The ground beneath him vibrated slightly. In the moment before he opened his eyes, the world shifted. The graves in the country churchyard split and opened, revealing damp, desolate buildings in a ruined town. A sound hovered in the dead air, the mourning of a train whistle, fading away into a distant human cry. Looking up, he saw only the repose of silent graves, many of which looked quite old, slumped beneath the bare trees. The sound of the approaching truck roused him, and he stood. Silver got out and came over. "I called the sheriff's office. The people from the house are coming, the Macklins." He slipped his arms around Fletch and drew him close. "You're cold. Come sit in the truck." "Silver, we're not here by accident." Silver looked at him questioningly. "She drew us here," Fletch told him. "Don't you feel it? Can't you hear it?" Silver looked toward the dead girl, listening. He went to the grave and looked down. "Fletch, come here." His voice was tight. "What is it?" "This isn't a girl," Silver said softly. "It's Shiloh Vance, that blond boy in 9th grade." The realization hit Fletch like a punch in the stomach. He studied the sharp, feminine features, the slender arms and delicate hands. Shiloh. Fletch hadn't really known him, couldn't remember ever having spoken with him, but now he recognized his face. Fletch recalled that he had mistaken Shiloh for a girl the first time he had noticed him at school. Looking closer, he saw that his long hair had been hacked short. Not just some kind of punk thing. It looked frantic and savage. He cut his hair before he cut his wrists. They turned. An old Plymouth Valiant approached the cemetery and stopped with the engine still running. A man in overalls got out of the car and came toward them with long strides. He took one look at the body on the grave and shouted back to his wife, who had remained by the car. "It's Jim and Lou Ellen's boy, the oldest." "Oh, dear God." Miss Macklin hurried forward. The man turned to Silver. "Y'all just found him?" "Yes, sir. We were turning around in the parking lot and saw him as we started out." The man looked at Silver closely, then at Fletch. "You the boys from Assembly?" "Yes, sir." Fletch saw Mr. Macklin's face harden. "Y'all friends of his?" "We knew him," Silver replied. "He went to school with us." The man took off his cap. He looked as if he wanted to say something else, but seemed to decide against it. "After you talk to the sheriff, y'all go back where you came from. I'll tell his family." Silver frowned. "Are you sure?" The man nodded. "They ain't going to want to see you anywhere around here. His daddy might just try to kick your ass." Fletch took out a pen and wrote down their telephone numbers. "Here, just in case you need to reach us." Mr. Macklin glanced at the paper, then stuffed it into the pocket of his overalls. He didn't speak to Fletch or meet his gaze. Later, when they were back on the highway, Fletch looked over at Silver. "I feel bad," he told him. "Bad for Shiloh and bad for us." Silver's face was grim. "We're not even 5 miles from Assembly, but it's a different world." "I wish I'd known him, Silver. I wish we'd known him. He must have felt so alone." That night, Fletch lay in bed, suspended between waking and sleep. The heap of blankets gave him warmth, but their heaviness made him feel trapped and breathless. He finally kicked them off and arranged his pillows around him, an opened cocoon. What he really needed in this big, empty room was a tall bed with a canopy and curtains, like the one which had belonged to Ebenezer Scrooge. The thought made him wonder about ghosts, and he sat up, glancing toward the door of the hall. The glow of the nightlight pooled on the carpet runner, which stretched the length of the passage. Fletch closed his eyes, restless and uneasy. He wondered if he could reach Silver mentally, crossing the few miles of nighttime country with a brief whisper, as if he were passing a secret message through a keyhole. He suspected he could accomplish it, but he held back. Something told him that he needed this separateness and distance, that something might be learned from solitude and silence. Maybe I don't need to sleep. Maybe I need to watch and wait. Then he did sleep, or at least he dreamed. His room grew smaller, and the night melted into morning. The shades are drawn. The room is insubstantial. The floor is carpeted, and the walls are cardboard thin. He sits at a small table, absolutely still, a dark silk scarf bound around his head, covering his eyes. In his left hand he holds a small knife with a thin, sharp blade. His hand is steady. His breathing is quiet. If there are other sounds coming from other rooms, they are beyond his hearing. His hand moves, guided by something deeper than memory or instinct, and he makes the first small cut. Fletch sat up in bed, a gasp caught in his throat. My knives, my teeth, my sticks. Everything vanished but the morning light. "Did you know the boy?" Fletch's father asked him the question at breakfast. They stood in the pastorium kitchen, Mark preparing toast while Fletch made scrambled eggs. "Not very well. I'd noticed him, but we didn't have any classes together. He was a grade below me." Fletch beat the eggs in a bowl, added a little milk, and tipped them into the hot skillet. He teased them until they were soft and fluffy, then divided them onto 2 blue willow plates. "I don't see how you do it," Mark said. "You never overcook them, and they never stick." He poured a cup of coffee for Fletch and took his plate to the table. "It's easy. The milk helps, and I spray the skillet first. I could show you." "No," said Mark. "If you did that, I'd feel obligated to make them myself." He buttered the toast and handed a piece to Fletch. "Liz knows the boy's family. She thinks he may have been gay." Fletch felt himself sinking inside. "I wish I'd known." Mark stood behind his chair and gave his shoulders a comforting squeeze. "It's hard to talk about such things without it sounding like gossip. I was just wondering if you knew." "No," said Fletch. "If he'd been open about it or had a boyfriend, I'm sure Silver and I would have heard. People in school would have talked about it the way they talk about us." "I guess that kind of thing is easier to manage for some folks than for others. Has it been very hard for you?" Fletch managed to smile. "I was pretty scared at first, more than Silver anyway, but you guys took it well." "Oh, well, Liz and I saw it coming a mile away," his father admitted. "I don't know what that boy's situation was like, but I suspect out in the country around here—" "Not good," Fletch told him. "You should have seen Mr. Macklin." Tightness grew in his throat. "Dad." His father looked at him. Fletch tried to swallow, but found he couldn't. I'm angry at them, at his parents. I haven't even met them, but I'm furious. If you had seen those cuts—" "I know." Mark bent and kissed his head. "And I feel like he belonged to us. Silver and I should have realized what was happening and helped him. But we didn't know it until it was too late. I never even said 3 words to him." Tears invaded his eyes. Mark's arms tightened around him. "Fletch, you aren't to blame. Some people may be, but not you, and not Silver." Fletch nodded, but something inside him refused to take the comfort his father was trying to give. At school, the whispers in the hall confirmed what he already felt to be true, that people believed Shiloh had been somehow connected with himself and with Silver. People gave him considerate looks, as if he had lost someone close to him, and Fletch began to feel certain that this was true, only he had never known. "Are you going to his funeral?" Renee Duran asked when she found him by his locker. She was dressed in a jacket made of patches, which Fletch coveted. "Some of us are, mostly people from his class." Fletch pulled out Silver's knapsack and rummaged through it, looking for his literature book. "I don't know. We haven't decided. From the way that guy at the church looked at us, Shiloh's parents probably wouldn't want us there." He slammed the locker shut. "Did you read that poem by John Davidson? It was pretty crazy." Renee refused to be diverted. "I think you ought to go, if you want to," she said softly. "You could sit in the back with us, and no one would notice." "That might be good. I'll talk to Silver. I feel like we ought to go, but we hardly knew him." Renee frowned. "Fletch, I want to ask you something. Don't be mad with me, okay?" Fletch turned to her. She looked like a house mouse, but she was brave and unafraid to speak her mind. "Renee, what could you possibly say that would make me mad?" She looked uncomfortable. "I know there are stereotypes, and I'm not trying to offend you or anything, but I'm curious. Have you ever felt like a girl?" Fletch looked over at her, trying not to smile. "Not exactly, but people sometimes do make mistakes. Strangers used to call me ma'am before I cut my hair." "That's what I mean, I guess. You're pretty. But Shy was even prettier than you. He was beautiful." Fletch nodded. "I know. He made boys nervous. Did you know that? Maybe that's why his only friends were girls." "Do you know whether he might have had a boyfriend?" Fletch asked her. "I don't think so. Barely spoke to anyone. Of course, he may have just been picky, like me. But here's the thing. I've heard there are boys who do feel like girls, like they were born with the wrong body. I wonder if Shy was like that. I remember he used to wear a little silver bracelet." Fletch frowned. "Did he ever say anything?" "No, not to me. There were just some rumors. I guess after people die, you always start to wonder things about them. Renee, it's weird. When we found him out there, Silver and I didn't recognize him. We thought he was a girl at first, even with his hair hacked short." Fletcher's throat tightened. "He cut his hair?" Renee asked. She closed her eyes as if the thought of it hurt her. "Why would he do that? He had hair like an angel." Fletch met Silver after school, at their accustomed spot on the breezeway connecting the high school and elementary school wings. It was the place where they had held their first real conversation, back in August. Fletch remembered how nervous he had been, sitting next to a strange and fascinating boy, entranced by the way he looked, the sound of his voice, the hint of shyness competing with the spark of mischief in his eyes. Silver had appeared so at ease with himself that it was hard to tell what he was thinking, and in the weeks that followed, the mystery only deepened. Fletch had grown more fond of him, more attached to him, more anxiously aware that his feelings for Silver were moving beyond those of a usual friendship. Fletch had first kissed him in September, on a night when the world was growing chill, and he could still feel the moment inside himself as if it had never ended, all that hope and terror hammering in his chest. Now they were bound together in ways he could never have imagined, even a month ago. He knew he was immeasurably fortunate. "Do you want to drive?" Silver asked him. "Sure. Where to?" "We don't have all that much homework," said Silver. "Let's go for a hike." "Okay, I'd like that. I need to get away." Fletch opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. Silver went around to the passenger side. "You want to head for the clearing or someplace different?" "Different? Like where?" "How about the Gold Mine Woods?" "Where's that?" "Thompson Mills," said Silver. "Over by New Liberty. Just hang a left. I'll show you." Fletch pressed the gas pedal to the floor and slowly released it. He put the key in the ignition and turned it, delighting to hear the engine start on the first try. He let the old truck run for a few moments, then tapped the gas, pressed the brake, and put it in gear. "You're really getting the hang of this," said Silver. "It's not the easiest truck to drive." "We're getting to know each other," Fletch agreed. "I guess trucks are like people." He looked ahead. "I thought you didn't want me to drive in town. There's a traffic light coming up. "You know," said Silver, "I seem to remember that light hanging upside down when I was little, with the green light on top. They must have fixed it sometime in the last 10 years. He pointed. "Turn left at the intersection, then take your next right." He kept quiet until Fletch had made the turn. "I've been wondering something all day. It was something you said when we found Shiloh at the cemetery, about him calling us or drawing us there. Do you remember?" "I was upset. I probably imagined it." Silver frowned. "I don't think so. I think he's out there." "Out there where he died? You mean like a ghost?" "I don't know." Silver turned and stared at the road ahead. "Fletch, you were dead once, and you came back. Maybe he can too." Fletch slowed the truck. "Let's go back." "To Quarry Ridge?" "Yeah. The gold mine woods will have to wait." "Okay," Silver agreed. "But pull over and let me drive. I know a shortcut." They bypassed the town and went straight into the countryside, passing small farms, which Fletch knew had been worked by the same families for generations. To the west, the fields had given way to industrial development, but between Assembly and Quarry Ridge they traveled through a region of dirt roads and wooden bridges, with barely any traffic. "Look," Silver pointed, "mules, a red and a blue." Fletch was skeptical. "They look brown and gray to me." "You have to use your imagination," Silver informed him. "Son, both these mules is colorblind," Fletch declared, in a drawl as thick as Tupelo honey. "That's Faulkner," said Silver. "Yep, that's Faulkner." They rounded a curve, and the church appeared. An old Chevrolet pickup sat in the gravel parking lot, its paint faded to the color of Georgia clay. As they drew up, Fletch noticed a bumper sticker bearing the word clergy. "Early 50s, Silver remarked. He got out and went over to admire the truck. "It's got a wood bed, but with a little work it could be a beauty." "You could ask the preacher about doing a trade." "No way," said Silver. "I love my truck." "Who is the preacher here, do you know?" "Buster Eaves. Dad's had lunch with him once or twice." They approached the grave where they had discovered Shiloh's body, a rough 19th century slab with lichen obscuring the inscription on the weather-beaten stone. "What should we do?" Fletch asked uneasily. Silver knelt and placed his hand on the stone. Fletch held back his questions, giving Silver time to listen. "There's another grave," Silver said at last. "Not this one. An old one in the forest, like those stone houses over at Assembly." Fletch looked around them, studying the surrounding graves. "There are some of them like that here." Silver caught his breath. "Wings and eyes," he whispered. Fletch stared at him. "What do you mean?" "Dark blazes." They turned at the sound of footsteps on the gravel. A man approached from the direction of the church. He was tall and broadly built, wearing a bright red windbreaker. "You boys sightseeing?" he rumbled. Silver stood up. "No, sir. I'm Silver Kendall. This is Fletch Forrester. We're the people who found Shiloh." "The boys from Assembly." He studied them more closely. "I know the pastor over there, Brother Forrester." "He's my father," Fletch told him. "Very educated man. I'm Buster Eaves. I'm the pastor here at Quarry Ridge." "We were admiring your truck," Silver said. "What year is it? 1950?
51, Pastor Eaves corrected him. "Bought it off a fellow over in Flowery Branch."
He looked down at the grave.
"Folks around here are mighty upset about Shiloh," he said quietly. "It's a terrible thing."
"Did he go to church here?" Fletch asked.
The man nodded. "Every Sunday, even Wednesday night sometimes. I guess y'all went to school together."
"Yes, sir. He was a grade below us."
"He was a difficult boy. Solitary," the pastor sighed. "I know he had problems, but he wouldn't talk to me. I did try. I prayed for him and for his family. They loved him, but they couldn't do much with him. He just shut everyone out."
Fletch looked at the man, feeling a sudden spark of anger. "Can I ask you something?" Pastor Eves raised his eyebrows. "If he had come to you, what would you have told him?" Buster Eves returned Fletch's gaze.
"I would have told him that God loves him, that whatever he might be dealing with, whatever temptations, there's an answer to it in the Word of God. And if he would just listen, if he would just open his heart, the Holy Spirit would fill him with the strength he needed to fight off the enemy and live a full life."
"Shiloh was probably afraid," Fletch told him. "He may have thought you were the enemy."
"I hear what you're saying," Buster said, "and I can see you think I'm your enemy, but I'm not. I just want God's best for you, the way I wanted it for Shiloh. But if what I've heard about the two of you is true, I have to tell you, you'll never abide in God's will as long as you're a slave to disordered affections." He sighed. "You boys are young. You've got your whole future ahead of you. You don't need that kind of life."
Fletch started to speak, but he felt Silver's hand rest lightly on his shoulder. "We appreciate your concern," Silver told the man. "I guess we'll be heading out."
The pastor nodded. "All right, then. Hope to see y'all again." He walked with them to the truck, watched as Silver opened the driver's side door for Fletch. "Over at Assembly," the man said, "they don't have a problem with that kind of thing?"
Silver shrugged. "I don't think so. They haven't talked much about it, to tell you the truth. It doesn't seem to be an issue."
"I'm not trying to make it an issue. I didn't mean it like that. But at Quarry Ridge, we just believe the Bible."
Silver nodded. "I understand."
"Cults are dangerous, son," the man persisted, "especially for young people. Those scars in your hands. Is it true what people say? Did they really do that to you?"
Silver nodded. "Yes, it's not what it seems, and it was my own choice. Fletch's father doesn't approve of it any more than you do, but we keep the old tradition."
"Brother Forrester shared a bit about that with me not too long ago," the man told him. "Montanists, I believe," he said, "the friends of God."
"I think so," said Silver. "It goes back a long way."
"I'll read up on it," Buster Eves promised. "Y'all take care."
Fletch watched as the big man strode back to the church. He slid across the seat and pulled the handle on the passenger's side. Silver climbed in and shut the door. He didn't look at Fletch until they were back on the road. Fletch gripped the wheel. "Thanks for taking over," he said wearily. "I was this close to losing it with him." "What did you expect?" Silver asked. "I'm not sure, but I hated that he spoke so softly. He didn't give me anything to hit." Silver cracked a smile. "Did you want to hit him?" "Is that so bad? He talks all sweet and caring and sincere, but I don't believe it for a minute. If you ask me, he killed Shiloh, Buster Eves and Quarry Ridge, and everything these people stand for. It wasn't being gay that killed him. It was being hopeless and afraid of them." Silver's mouth tightened. "I suspect that has a lot to do with it." "You heard him, Silver. Is that what we have? Something disordered?" Silver didn't respond with a joke. He turned and looked at Fletch seriously. "What do you think?" "It doesn't feel that way to me, but maybe it did to Shiloh, hearing all that day after day." "We were right to come back here today," Silver told him. "I know it was hard, talking to that man, and it felt pretty useless, but you never know. Sometimes a word gets through." Fletch looked at him. "What did you mean back there? Wings and eyes, you said, and something about a grave." "I saw a bird, like a hawk. It had talons." "A grave and a hawk?" said Fletch. "What could that have to do with Shiloh?" "I don't know, but I'm convinced he's out there. Maybe not at that particular spot, but somewhere close." Fletch shivered. He paused at a crossroad, checking his directions. "Somehow that makes it even worse." "I remembered something else," said Silver. "Something a bit odd from last year at school. I think it may have been the last day, right before the summer vacation. I wasn't driving much then, so I rode the bus. I remember Shiloh standing in the line beside me that afternoon. He was carrying a bag." Fletch frowned. "You remembered all that at the grave?" "Yes, it came back to me in a flash. It may be important." Silver closed his eyes. "I can even see the bag he carried. It looked like a military knapsack. His hair was shorter back then than it was this year." Fletch was intrigued. He had sensed nothing like this at the grave. "Anything else?" Silver hesitated. "I can tell he's uncomfortable. It's like he wants to say something, but he doesn't get on the bus." He opened his eyes. "I haven't thought about it since the day it happened, but now it's clearer than any normal memory would be." "He's reaching out to you," Fletch said softly. Silver frowned. "He was lonely and lost. I didn't realize that at the time, but I can see it now." Fletch recalled his impressions on the day they had found Shiloh's body. An odor of coal smoke, a town half ruinous, black and gray and dead white, with searing light and suffocating shadows. Even now he could feel the dampness of the place, the heat and the glare, the faint vibration beneath the pavement. He wanted to talk to Silver about it, but found it difficult to speak. It was as if he were caught between two worlds, the ordinary one and an older one pushing up from beneath it. "The road feels strange," he managed at last. "What do you mean?" "It's uneven. It keeps warping. And look at the trees, they're leaning in. It's like the record's on the wrong speed, dragging. "Fletch, pull over." "I'm sorry," Fletch told him. "I'm so sorry." He found the shoulder of the road and stopped the truck, skidding slightly in the gravel. His right arm vibrated helplessly. "Easy," Silver murmured. "Remember to breathe slowly. Let your body relax." Sorry. "It's okay. It will pass." Fletch closed his eyes, but found it didn't help. He opened them and looked across the gray fields toward the horizon, imagining the landscape flooded, the outbuildings submerged, all the way to their sagging roofs. Silver reached across and took his hand. "I have an idea," he said. "I'm going to teach you a dance." "I can't dance, Silver. I'm not graceful the way you are. I can't even do the jitterbug without tripping over my own feet." Silver smiled. "It's not that kind of dance." He opened the door. "Let me drive. It's all back roads." "So where are you taking me?" "Hurricane Shoals. It's not far. We're halfway there already. Do you feel well enough?" "Yes," said Fletch. "I hate these attacks. I can never tell when they're going to happen. But I'm better now." He and Silver changed places. "I remember Hurricane Shoals." Didn't there used to be an old settlement along the river?" "That's right, late 1700s, around the same time as Assembly." Fletch vaguely recalled that the shoals were up in the northern part of the county. He caught a flash of memory, an inflatable ring with cartoon sea creatures, an octopus, a seahorse. How old had he been? 9 or 10? "There's a bridge," he said, "a covered bridge." "Used to be," Silver told him, "not anymore." In less than 20 minutes, they turned into a narrow dirt lane and drove to the stone foundation of the vanished bridge. They parked the truck and got out. Silver pointed down to the opaque, seemingly motionless water. "You can just make out some of the old timbers. Vandals burned it a few years back." "I like the river," said Fletch. "That must be the shoals down there, below the old dam." "Yes, if we keep to the left, we can follow the riverbank." Though the water moved slowly above the dam, it flowed fast below it. The current became violent and dangerous, swirling around boulders and tumbling over slopes of bare granite. Standing at the edge, Fletch felt surrounded by invisible activity, even though he and Silver were completely alone. He shoved his hands into the pockets of his coat. "It's so cold," he observed, "but at least we've got the whole place to ourselves." "That's the way I like it," said Silver. "It's overrun during the summer, but nobody comes this time of year." He led the way, crossing a narrow canal leading to a ruined sluice gate where the village mill had stood. They moved downstream, picking their way over the granite until they reached a broad area of sand and grass between the water and a steep hillside. "You can almost imagine how it looked when the village was here." He pointed up through the trees. "A forge stood at the top of that hill. The river curves around the slope and doubles back. That spillway we crossed cuts off this whole area, so we're completely surrounded by water." "What happened? Why was it abandoned?" "Trouble between the settlers and the natives. Then a flood, I think." "Is this your dancing spot?" Fletch asked. "One of them, but only if I'm here alone." "You were dancing the first time I ever saw you, back in the summer. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. The sun shone on your hair. It looked like it was flying." "That was a windy day," said Silver. He led Fletch onto the grass. "Today is still, and it's winter. I'm going to teach you a winter dance." "I've warned you, it's hopeless." Fletch loved watching Silver dance, but at the moment he felt self-conscious, ill at ease in his own body, as if he were being watched. "The first thing is to be still and to listen. This place will teach you how to move." Silver closed his eyes and slowed his breathing. His head turned slightly. His hand lifted. Fletch tried to hear what Silver was hearing. Beyond the rush of the cold river, a steady roar of traffic came from the nearby interstate. A bright red cardinal landed on a picnic table at the base of the hill, and Silver's arm moved in response. His body turned. It was so slow. "Give me your hand." Fletch tried to move with him, but he felt awkward and unbalanced. "Silver." "Hush, just listen." Fletch listened. He went quiet inside and allowed himself to be still. He forgot about moving and moved. Silver's arm slipped around him. His hand closed on his hand. His whisper touched his ear. It wasn't like dancing. There was more stillness than motion. Fletch scarcely changed position. He drifted. It was like falling asleep on the wind. They were no longer being watched. They were being joined. "He's here," Fletch whispered. "He's very cold." "Yes." Shiloh danced. Frozen pinpricks touched Fletch's face. "It's beginning to snow," he marveled. "I promised you snow before Christmas," Silver told him. "You can do that." Fletch drew Silver close. He found his lingering anger had gone. Buster Eaves was like someone they had encountered long ago, or in a dream. "Thank you, Silver," he said softly. "I love you, Fletch." The troubling ghost of Quarry Ridge, wrapped in shadow at the edge of the world, seemed very far away. You have been listening to an audio recording of The Ghost of Quarry Ridge by Beau Farr, the fourth story in Dim and Flaring Lamps, the third book of the Forked Ways. The audio production is by R.J. Williams. The text and audio book are copyright 2024 by Beau Farr. All rights reserved.